She was 21 and stranded. No family left to take her in, no roof of her own, just a small brass bee smoker worn warm by 4 generations of women's hands, a single thumbed page of her granny's hive book sewn into the lining of her coat pocket, and 5 single-dollar bills she had earned wiping tables at a roadside diner outside Huntsville. And with that $5, she bought a small natural limestone bee cave with a hand-built oak door set into the foot of a mossy bluff 3 miles up Honey Hollow Road in the holler called Honey Hollow in Madison County, Arkansas, in a stretch of the Ozark Hills that had not heard a hive humming under the bluff since the autumn of 1966. The hand-cut oak door had warped on its iron hinges. The path to it was lost under 58 autumns of fallen oak leaves. But what nobody knew, least of all Eulalie May Calloway herself, was that ranged on the hand-built limestone shelves inside the cool, dim cave, in straw skeps and old pine boxes, was something her granny and her granny's granny had sealed there across 143 years that would change her life forever. Before we go on, if these stories mean something to you, take a moment and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight. It means more than you know to see how far these stories travel. She had seen the cave on a hand-printed card thumbtacked to the bulletin board of the Madison County Co-op in Huntsville in soft pencil. Limestone bee cave, half-acre, hollow frontage, $5 or best offer. See Mr. Asa Trammell at the courthouse. She had $8.40 folded in the inside pocket of her flannel workshirt, the last of 2 weeks of diner wages. She walked the mile down to the small Madison County courthouse on a warm Tuesday morning in early October, with the sourwoods just beginning to flame red on the slopes, and she asked the woman at the front desk for Mr. Asa Trammell by name. Mr. Asa Trammell was 79 years old and had been the deputy clerk of Madison County for 51 of those years. He looked up at her over the long oak counter when she said her name, looked at her over the top of his bifocals, and went very still. "Calloway," he said slowly, "the holler in the word, from Honey Hollow. You'd be Eulalia's granddaughter then." Eulalie May nodded once. He folded his bifocals and walked back into a small storeroom without another word. He came back 2 minutes later with a heavy iron key on a piece of plain butcher twine, the key warm from being held in a drawer for a long time. $5, he said. "We've been keeping this key 58 years. Your granny left it with my daddy back in 1966, and she told him plain, hand this to whichever Calloway girl walks back up Honey Hollow asking after the bees. We had begun to wonder if any of you would." He laid the key in her palm. She paid him 5 soft paper dollars, signed her name, and he walked her to the door and set his old hand for 1 second on her shoulder. And he said, very softly, "You go on up there before sundown, hun. The bees have been waiting on you a long while." She had grown up with the smell of beeswax and oak smoke, with the warm, honey-sweet smell of fresh comb being uncapped on her granny's kitchen table, with the dry, sharp smell of dried oak leaves smoldering in the small brass bee smoker, with the dim earth smell of damp burlap soaked in sugar water for a new swarm, with the cool mineral smell of the cave itself, breathing up the path from the bluff on a warm summer night, with the deep gold smell of honey poured slow from the centrifugal extractor into clean glass jars, and with the green smell of sourwood and tulip poplar and persimmon in bloom on the slope above the hollow when the bees were working a flow. She had grown up sitting on a low cedar stool at her granny's kitchen table when she was 3 and 4 years old, watching her granny's long sun-browned hands lift the wooden frames of capped comb out of the bee box, the bees crawling slow and unbothered across her wrists, with a steadiness that did not look like courage, but like trust. Her granny was Eulalia Calloway, born in 1942 in the same small-frame house in Honey Hollow, where Eulalie May would later be born, the only daughter of Caleb and Maddie Calloway. She had learned the bees at the side of her own mother, on the same limestone shelves and the same straw skeps her great-grandmother had built into the bee cave in 1882. Eulalia was tall and thin, with the sun-browned hands of a woman who worked outdoors in every season, her white hair worn in a single low knot pinned at the back of her neck. Eulalie May had called her Granny from the first day she could shape the sound. Eulalie May's mother, Bernice, had left the hollow when Eulalie May was 4 and had not come back. And Eulalie May's father, Wyatt, had been killed in a tractor rollover up on Round Mountain when she was 9, so the years had belonged to Granny from the time Eulalie May could walk a hollow path without stumbling. She learned to recognize the hum of a queen-right colony from a queenless one by ear before she could read. By 6, she could light the small brass bee smoker with a handful of dry oak leaves and pump the bellows soft and slow without choking the fire. By 8, she could lift a wooden frame out of a hive without crushing a single bee on the bottom bar. By 10, she could read a swarm by its sound on the air and tell you, from the pitch of the hum, whether it was a primary swarm with the old queen or a secondary swarm with a new virgin. By 12, she could read a comb. She could stand at her granny's side and see, before her granny told her, whether the brood pattern was solid and even or spotty and going wrong, whether the comb was capped with the warm gold cap of healthy ripe honey or the darker, flatter cap that meant the bees had brought in too much water and the honey was not yet ready to seal. By 15, she had worked her own hive for 2 full seasons. By 18, she had worked 4, pulled and uncapped 218 frames of comb in her own hand, and learned every one of the 21 signs of a healthy hive Granny had taught her by hand and by ear. Granny, on a warm Saturday morning in October in Eulalie May's 18th year, walked out of the small smokehouse beside the hive yard with a single uncapped honeycomb on a clean wooden trencher and laid it in Eulalie May's hands at the kitchen door and said, "You are a bee woman now, child. The bees know you. The smoke knows you. The comb knows you." And then she said, in her quiet way, "And there is one place I have not yet shown you, because the cave herself had to choose the morning. Come up the hollow with me." But before Eulalie May or Eulalia, there had been Mahala. Mahala Calloway had come down out of a small Scotch-Irish farm in Roane County, Tennessee, in the spring of 1881, 21 years old, with her young husband Wiley Calloway, an ox cart, a single beech bee gum hollow, and the swarm of dark mountain honeybees that lived inside it, the descendants of a captured wild swarm. Her own grandmother had taken off a fallen tulip poplar near the Holston River in 1842. Mahala had carried that bee gum on a cushion of moss across 240 miles of rough Ozark wagon track without losing the colony, because her grandmother had taught her, and her great-grandmother before that a swarm in a moving cart will stay if a woman keeps her hand against the gum at every fording. The Calloways had come into a small Ozark hollow in Madison County in the late autumn of 1881 and had built a small cabin on a flat shelf above a clear branch, and Mahala had stood at the foot of the moss-covered limestone bluff that rose behind the cabin, and she had seen, in the lower face of the bluff, a small natural cave mouth no larger than a hearth, and she had decided, the way a woman decides a thing once and keeps it for 60 years, that the cave was the place. She set the bee gum at the mouth of the cave for the first winter, and the colony came through the cold of 1881 to 1882 strong and clustered, because the cave behind the gum held a steady 56 degrees year-round out of the breath of the bluff. The following spring, Mahala built a hand-cut oak door for the cave mouth, set into the limestone with hand-forged iron hinges, and she built, inside the cool, dim cave, 4 long limestone shelves at hive height against the natural walls. She set her first 4 straw skeps on those shelves in May of 1882. She kept the cave for 55 years. She added a skep a season and then a wooden hive box when she switched to movable frames in 1904, and she labeled each hive in her careful hand on a small slip of waxed paper sealed inside a tin tag nailed to the box with the year the colony had been started, the name of the swarm it had come from, and the line of queens it carried. And she trained a daughter and a granddaughter and a great-granddaughter at her side, and the bee cave at Honey Hollow ran without a single dead winter for 84 years, through Mahala and her daughter Sophronia, and her granddaughter Maddie, and her great-granddaughter Eulalia, until the autumn of 1966 when Eulalia was 24, and her own mother Maddie had just gone, and Eulalia closed the oak door of the cave on a cool October evening and did not open it again for 58 years. Granny had 3 rules for the bees. The first was this: the bees are not yours. You do not own a hive, child. You stand near a hive. You learn its mood. You take the honey it can spare, and you leave the honey it cannot. and you say thank you when you close the lid, every single time, whether anyone is listening or not. A bee woman who thinks she owns the bees is a bee woman who will be stung out of her yard inside one season. The second was this. The smoke is the soft word. You do not subdue a hive with smoke, you speak to it. 3 slow puffs at the entrance, a long pause. 2 slow puffs at the inner cover, another pause. The smoke says to the bees, I am here, I am gentle, I will not be long. A hard hand on the smoker turns the soft word into a shout, and a hive that has been shouted at will sting you the next time you walk past it without smoke in your hand. Mind the bellows. The third was this. The cave is the keeper, not us. The cave keeps the bees alive through the cold. The cave keeps the queen laying through the dry months. The cave keeps the comb from melting in the heat. We do not keep the bees, hun. The cave keeps the bees. We are only the door the cave opens and closes and opens again. Mind that above the other 2. Granny died in November of 2023, on a cool, clear afternoon, in her chair beside the wood stove in the small frame house at Honey Hollow, with the open-thumbed hive book in her lap and a small jar of fresh autumn sourwood honey on the side table beside her. The doctor said it was her heart. Eulalie May was 20. She did not cry. She came home from her shift at the diner outside Huntsville and found Granny in the chair, and she sat down on the floor beside the chair and laid her cheek against Granny's cool hand, and she stayed there until the funeral home came. She finished labeling the last jar of autumn sourwood herself that night, in her own careful young hand, and only when the jar was sealed did she sit down beside the cold wood stove and finally let herself cry. The small house in Honey Hollow belonged to the bank, because Granny had taken a second mortgage on it during her last sickness, and within 4 months of Granny's funeral, the bank had come and asked Eulalie May to be out by the 1st of September. She had left with the small brass bee smoker Granny had pressed into her hand on her last clear afternoon, a single thumbed page from Granny's hive book sewn into the lining of her coat pocket, a small canvas bag of her clothes, and the photograph of 3 women standing at the oak door of the bee cave in 1948. If these stories are reaching you tonight, take a second to subscribe. It truly does help us keep making them. And tell us in the comments, was there ever a small living thing your family kept tended, a hive, a starter, a garden bed, that you are afraid will end with you? The 3-mile walk up Honey Hollow Road from where the borrowed truck would no longer climb was steeper than she remembered. The sourwoods were beginning to flame red on the slopes. The persimmon trees in the bottom were holding their last orange leaves. The clear branch came down soft and clear over rounded brown stones along the right of the road. She found the cabin foundation first, 4 courses of fieldstone in a square of new grass where the old cabin had been, and just beyond the foundation, set against the moss-covered foot of a tall limestone bluff that rose into oak hickory woods, the hand-cut oak door of the bee cave. The oak planks were silvered and split and warped on iron strap hinges rusted dark, the limestone framing the door patched green and silver with moss and lichen. 58 autumns of fallen oak leaves banked deep against the threshold. No sound came from behind the door, but a single warm, dry breath of cave air moved past her cheek as she stepped close, and the air smelled of beeswax and old oak smoke and damp stone. She did not cry. She brushed the deep bank of oak leaves away from the threshold with her boot, fitted the heavy iron key into the rusted iron lock plate, worked the key gently for the better part of 2 minutes until the wards remembered how to turn, and then the bolt slid back with a small dry sound and the warped oak door eased open on its iron hinges with the slow groan of a door that has held for 143 years. The cool, dim breath of the cave came out to meet her, 56 degrees, and dry and smelling of beeswax and oak smoke and the faint, warm, sweet ghost of capped honey. She stood in the doorway a long minute. Then she lit her Granny's small brass kerosene lantern, and she stepped inside. The cave was 12 feet deep and 8 feet wide, and tall enough for her to stand, the natural limestone walls cool and dry and patched with moss only at the cave mouth, the deeper walls bare and pale cream gray. 4 long limestone shelves ran along the natural walls at hive height, hand-built by Mahala in 1882, the stone fitted course by course against the natural rock and worn smooth at the front edges by 140 years of hand-setting and lifting hives. On the shelves stood the hives. Some were tall, round straw skeps, dark with age, the rye straw coils so old they had gone the color of dark tobacco. Some were squared pine bee boxes with hand-cut wooden frames inside, the pine boards silvered with age, the small tin label tags nailed to the front of each box still legible in the lantern light. And in the dim, warm, dry air of the cave, low at first and then growing as her ear settled, came the steady, patient hum that Eulalie May had known by ear since she was 4 years old. The hum of a queen-right colony, alive and clustered, and not just one. She held the lantern higher. The hum was coming from 3 of the hives, 3 colonies, alive, in a cave that had been closed for 58 years. She did not move for a long time. Then she walked slowly along the side shelf, the lantern held up, and she read the tin label tags as she passed. 1882, Hive 1, from the Holston Wild Swarm of 1842, line of Queens, Mahala. 1885, Hive 4, Swarm of Hive 1. 1904, Hive 7, first movable frame box, line continued from Hive 1. 1921, Hive 11, captured wild swarm from Bell's Mountain. 1945, Hive 16, swarm of Hive 7, Eulalia's first colony. 1966, Hive 21, the last hive Granny had set on the shelf before she had closed the door. And on 3 of the boxes, the tin label tags caught the lantern light in a way that made Eulalie May understand what she was looking at. The colonies that were still humming were the descendants, not of a wild swarm captured a year ago in some other place. Of the original swarm, Mahala's grandmother had taken off the tulip poplar on the Holston River in 1842. The colonies were 183 years old, in the unbroken sense that a bee colony is ever old, swarm to swarm, queen to queen, the line never broken, the cave keeping them alive through every winter. Mahala and Sophronia and Maddie and Eulalia had tended them, and through 58 winters with no human hand at all. On the back wall, on the deepest stone shelf, sat a small flat tin box with a hinged lid and a small canvas sack. Eulalie May lifted the tin first. Inside was the original hive book, thick, sewn together with linen thread, the cover of soft tan deerskin, the pages of cotton paper hand-cut and hand-ruled, and on every page, in the careful old hands of 4 generations of women, was the whole record of the bee cave, the hive number, the year of the swarm, the line of queens it came from, the seasons it had produced, the mood of the colony, gentle or hot, and what the bee woman had done to gentle it, the flow it worked best, sourwood or persimmon or tulip poplar or wild plum. Page after page after page, 143 years of careful observation. Inside the canvas sack lay 11 small American gold coins, $5 pieces from the 1860s and 70s, and folded into the back of the hive book, sealed with a drop of beeswax gone soft amber with age, was a single letter, the wax still whole, addressed in long, careful old penmanship. To whoever opens this door. From Mahala Calloway, bee woman, Honey Hollow, 1883. She broke the wax seal with her thumb and read the letter aloud to the cave because there was no one else to read it to, and the bees were the only ones listening. To whoever opens this door. If you are reading this, you have come up Honey Hollow with a key in your hand, and you have brushed the leaves away from the door, and you have known to light the smoker and to listen for the hum before you reached for the comb, and you are a Calloway woman, and the bees have called you home. My name is Mahala Calloway. I was born Mahala Whitfield in Roane County, Tennessee, in the spring of 1860, the eldest of 3 sisters, and the only one my mother taught the bees because I was the only one who would sit still long enough to listen to them. I came down out of the Holston Hills with my husband Wiley in the spring of 1881 with a single beech bee gum on a cushion of moss in our ox cart, and the swarm in that gum was the granddaughter of a wild swarm my own grandmother took off a fallen tulip poplar in 1842, and I carried that gum across 240 miles of Ozark wagon track without losing the colony, because my grandmother taught me to keep my hand on the gum at every fording. I came into this hollow in the autumn of 1881. stood at the foot of this bluff, and I knew, the way a woman knows a thing once and keeps it for 60 years, that this small cave was a keeper of bees, because the breath that came out of it on a hot August afternoon was cool and dry and smelled already, before I had set a single hive, of old beeswax and limestone. I built this oak door in the spring of 1882, and I built the 4 limestone shelves with my own hands that same summer, and I set my first 4 skeps on those shelves in May. The hives in this cave, daughter, are not money. They are better than money. They are the granddaughters and the great-granddaughters and the great-great-great-granddaughters of a wild swarm my grandmother took off a tulip poplar in 1842, and they are alive in the cave because the cave keeps them alive, not because any one of us could have kept them alive on the open ground through 84 winters in this hollow. The gold in the sack is the small gold Wiley and I had set aside in our first 10 years here, and I have not spent it. And I trust you will not spend it for any reason other than to replace this oak door or repair the limestone shelves, because the cave herself is the inheritance, not the gold, and the bees are the inheritance, not the cave. Do not move the bees. Do not bring the hives out into the sun. Do not be greedy with the honey. Take what the bees can spare in a good year and leave what they cannot in a bad one. Light the smoker slow, 3 soft puffs at the entrance, a long pause, 2 soft puffs at the inner cover, and say thank you when you close the lid every single time, whether anyone is listening or not. The bees are listening. They are always listening. With my whole hand and my whole heart, Mahala Calloway, Bee Woman, Honey Hollow, Madison County, Arkansas, the 14th of October, 1883. Eulalie May laid the letter flat on the deep stone shelf. She set her open palm across it. She did not cry. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cool, dry beeswax and oak smoke smell of the cave. And the tight thing that had lived in her chest since the cool November afternoon she had walked into her granny's kitchen loosened. The name of the loosening was home. She drove the gold pieces down to a careful coin dealer in Fayetteville the following week, a man named Mr. Otis Decoteau, who valued the 11 small $5 gold pieces at $24,600. She sold 4 of them. She put $9,000 in a savings account at the Madison County Bank, and she walked back up Honey Hollow with a fresh oak plank for the door, 2 coils of new iron hinge strap, a small jar of new beeswax for sealing labels, 6 new wooden hive frames, and a small new bottle of sugar syrup for the spring buildup. She did not move the bees. The bees stayed where Mahala and Sophronia and Maddie and Eulalia had set them, on the cool limestone shelves of the cave. But she did, that first March, walk down to the older men and women of Honey Hollow and 3 hollers around it, and she carried a single small comb of bright gold sourwood honey to each of them, with a small slip of waxed paper tied to the comb in her own careful young hand. Mrs. Sari Bingham, 89, who had been a child when Eulalia made her first jar of honey. Mr. Lonzo Pettigrew, 86, whose father had been Mahala's first customer. Mrs. Velma Trammell, 81, whose great-grandmother had bought from Sophronia in 1890. Each one took the small comb in their old hands and looked at it for a long time. Each one said the same thing, in some form. We had begun to wonder if any of you would come back, and in the late spring, an older man drove up the road from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, who had been searching for 30 years for surviving genetic lines of pre-mite Ozark mountain honeybees. And he stood in the open door of the bee cave on a warm April afternoon, with his hand against his mouth, listening to the steady, patient hum coming off the 3 living colonies. And he said only, "Please, hon, please let me come back with the lab." That is the thing about the beekeeping our grandmothers teach us, the slow kind, the kind we learn at a kitchen table beside a small brass smoker when we are 3 years old. It is not really about the honey. The honey is the wage. The bees are the trade. The trade is the cool, dry limestone cave that keeps a colony alive through 84 winters when no woman is there to lift the lid, and the soft 3-puff word of smoke spoken at every entrance, and the steady, patient hand that takes only what a hive can spare. The trade is the elder women and men of 3 hollers who walk out to their porches in March holding a small comb of bright sourwood honey in their old hands, and weep quietly and say, "We'd begun to wonder if any of you would come back. The trade is, above all, the truth, Mahala wrote in her letter on the 14th of October, 1883. The cave is the keeper, not us. The bees are the inheritance, not the cave. We are only the door, the cave opens and closes and opens again. Eulalie May Calloway was 21 years old and stranded. She had $5 to her name, and she spent them on a small natural limestone bee cave with a hand-built oak door set into the foot of a mossy bluff 3 miles up Honey Hollow Road in Honey Hollow in Madison County, Arkansas. It was the best $5 she ever spent. If this story has kept you company tonight, thank you for sitting up with us. Sleep well, breathe easy, and see you in the last warm light of the day.